mind.
This relationship caused scandal throughout Athens, not just because of Vespasia's profession, but because Pericles treated her as an equal, something deeply unusual in 5th century Athens.
One of the things that created such a stir was that Pericles had her participate in conversations that he had with some of the most important individuals with whom he talked. There's jokes to suggest that Vespasian actually was the person who wrote Pericles' speeches.
Pericles and his circle were to become one of the most famous and influential groups in Western history. But in 5th century Athens, the highest achievements of art and culture were not restricted to the elite. Here in the shadow of the Acropolis sits the world's first theater. Twice a year, the Athenian population would gather here to watch a great festival, a festival of drama. Television, cinema, theater, all owe their existence to this place. For here is the home of popular entertainment.
There's one huge difference between the ancient theatre and our own, and that is that it was incredibly noisy. We hear stories of how, when they didn't like a play, the audience booed and they hissed and they actually got actors driven off the stage. But there's other stories that showed that when they were going with the story and deeply involved in it, they actually all collectively burst into tears.
The favourite tales of the Greek stage were called tragedies. These were stories as shocking as a contemporary horror movie. The tragedies told stories of great men falling from their heights, losing everything they owned.
Greek tragedy shows human beings, however able, however brilliant, however intelligent, quite unable to alter the destinies which have been decreed for them.
These tragedies have fascinated audiences ever since. This 19th century painting shows the story of the mythical ruler Agamemnon, who was murdered by his own wife. Another tragedy told of King Oedipus, who gouged out his eyes when he discovered that he had married his own mother. These Athenians, natives of the greatest city in the ancient world, seemed to revel in seeing how frail greatness could really be.
I don't think we can use Greek tragedy to tell us exactly what happened in reality. It's not a document of Athenian social life. But what it does do is take us directly and immediately into the psychological heart of those Athenian men. The kind of dreams and fantasies and fears and imaginary scenarios that they came up with in the theatre have to tell us just as much about them as any document of everyday reality could.
Theatres were built in every major Greek city, in Sparta, Corinth, on the island of Delos, here in Delphi. Athens was the heart of a cultural revolution that would spread across the Mediterranean and echo around the world.
Periclean Athens seems to me to belong in a smallish collection of cities where truly great moments in the human experience took place. Culture in the broadest sense reaches a peak.
But after 20 years of building the cultural capital of the Western world, Pericles and his fellow Athenians would now find that their theatre and their tragedies would hold a bitter sting.
It is possible to think of Pericles, indeed I think of him, as a man with a tragic flaw, as the sort of man whose greatest qualities, the ones that make him most admirable and successful, turn out to be the seeds of his own destruction.
Pericles began to plan a grand new venture. A venture even more ambitious than the Parthenon. He wanted to make Athens the undisputed leader of the Mediterranean. Little did Pericles know that he would now bring Athens not glory, but death, destruction, and the loss of her empire. Athens, the year 431 BC. Pericles takes the podium of the great democratic assembly and presents the Athenians with his most daring plan. War with Athens' oldest enemy, the city-state of Sparta. Sparta was the only other Greek city-state which still matched Athens in power. For the Spartans, trained from birth in the arts of war, were a fearsome military force, and they ruled all of southern Greece. Pericles was convinced it was time to finally vanquish this old rival. Victory over the Spartans would make Athens the undisputed leader of the Mediterranean.
If we go to war, as I think we must, be determined that we are not going to climb down. For it is from the greatest dangers that the greatest glory is to be won.
The assembly embraced Pericles' plan. The Athenians were never ones to shrink from a fight.
The ancient Greeks as a whole were not by any stretch of the imagination a peace-loving people. Peace was an interruption of war rather than vice versa, and the Athenians were as bellicose as any other Greeks.
But for all the Athenians' enthusiasm, Pericles knew that this would not be an easy war to win. Athens' power lay in her navy. The Spartan infantry could well defeat her on land. And so he proposed a strategy of unusual complexity and sophistication. Pericles convinced the Athenians to abandon all the land around Athens and to retreat behind the great long walls that stretched down from the city to its harbor at Piraeus. Pericles would use the Athenian navy to supply the city by sea. And he would use this same navy to attack and harry the Spartans from the coast, slowly wearing the enemy down until they gave in. It was a strategy based on a set of finely judged assumptions.
Pericles' expectation was that after a year or two, but no more than 3, the Spartans would realize that they could not win the war because the Athenians would never give them the infantry battle they needed in order to win, and they had no other device available.
The Athenians crowded behind the city walls.